And as he passed a parked car, he spotted something, like I was saying earlier, that just didn't look right. So he pulled his car over and got out to investigate a little further. And as he walked in front of that parked car, the driver put it in drive and ran the sergeant over. Like,
Okay. All right. Um, when I'm trying to think when the whole Rodney King happened, that was in the early 90s, right?
1991, I believe.
Okay. W-
The riot afterwards was in 1992.
when you were a police officer, have you heard of anything like that, like police officers beating someone up, and have you encountered anything like that?
I mean, I heard about the things that were in the news. Obviously, there was that. There was something around 95 or 96, I think, in the NYPD with a couple of very high profile incidents. Did I ever see like a group of cops beat somebody nearly to death? No.
Okay. Um, so you become a sergeant. What does your job look like now?
I am still working patrol, and I have a team of officers who report directly to me, depending on the shift, anywhere from 5 to 15 officers who report directly to me. Our squads were set up, or our seniority was picked once a year. So most of the people in your squad in January were the same people in your squad by December. So usually you had 1 year of the same people working under you. There would be one or two that would transfer in and out based on different job assignments, and sometimes those people would be in the same squad for several years. If somebody liked working in a particular squad on a particular shift, then they could be there for a number of years.
How important is that leadership? Because from what I understand, everything from the leader trickles down to the rest of the officers, man.
In my opinion, the sergeant's position in a police department is the most important position. Um, the officers, it's often referred to that the sergeant is like herding cats, right? They're just all over the place and you're trying to get them all together, right? The officers are a diverse group of people with diverse thoughts, right? So some of them want to sit down and do nothing. And you can't allow that as a sergeant. You need them to go out and, at the very minimum, be visible in their designated area. Some of them want to always go out and proactively arrest people. But by doing that, it leaves their zone unpatrolled and the officers from other zones having to go in and handle their jobs, right? So there's a fine line of what everybody's doing and the sergeant staying on top of all that. Now, also from the other end, as a captain or a director, even a lieutenant, we can come up with either very good policies or very bad policies. And the only way those policies are going to work in reality is if the sergeant implements them well, right? So I'm a captain. I come up with this great policy. It's it's unmistakable on how it could be interpreted, and it's for a good reason. And I put it out, and the sergeants are like, "Yeah, whatever. That policy's never going to work." Right? The sergeants have to make sure that the officers are doing that thing that you implemented. And on the other hand, I can come out with a policy that's really poorly written, but it's got a good purpose. And the sergeant can go, "All right, look, we know what it means. This is how we're going to do it. and it'll be implemented properly. So that sergeant, in my opinion, is the most important position in the entire department.
So wait, I'm trying to get this clear.
One more thing, that sergeant can also encourage improper policing or demand proper policing, right? So that sergeant can go, look, man, you want to go sit in a park for 10 hours a day? I don't care. I'm getting paid. Or that sergeant could be like, no, come on, let's go, let's go back up that car that just went on the domestic violence in the next zone.
So wait, you're trying to tell me that a new policy can an officer can recommend a new policy?
No, I'm saying that a captain writes a policy and implements it for the department,
Okay.
right?
So how does that policy become lawful?
Well, the policy has to be, you have to write it lawfully, right? Like you can create a policy for your department that no other departments have, but it's still legal.
Hmm. Okay. Because what I'm trying to say is, like, let's say a captain comes up with a policy that stop everybody wearing a purple shirt. Like,
And, that's not lawful. I'm saying, like, let's say let's say police cars keep getting damaged, so the captain writes a policy that at the beginning of your shift you're going to inspect your entire police car and then take care of this check off list to make sure that there's no new damage on your car, right? If the sergeant doesn't make sure that the cops are not only doing that but doing it properly, then that policy is going to fail.
okay, okay. So this is an internal thing. This is, I think, where I got confused, because I think I thought that you meant that police officers could just come up with a policy and you can implement it into your workforce, basically, like outside of the department.
Well, they
But
can, but it doesn't necessarily. I'm not necessarily talking about law. I'll give you a real life example.
yeah, please, because I'm
We
getting a
had
little confused, man.
thousands Saturns. The car maker Saturn
Mhm.
was extremely easy to steal. So we had um, a captain. In fact, it was the one who I mentioned just didn't implement anything he learned in the testing process. Issue a policy that said you will stop every Saturn that you see driving around. Well, you and I just talked about reasonable suspicion. We don't have reasonable suspicion to stop them just because a lot of Saturns get stolen, right? So the sergeants were smart enough to say, look, this is a bad policy. All right. What we're going to do is every Saturn that you see, you're going to run a license plate because you don't need any level of suspicion to run a license plate. Then, if it's stolen, you're going to initiate the stop. If it's not stolen, you're going to move on to the next Saturn. All right. So the sergeants recognized the deficiency in the policy, in
I
this
got
case, deficiency, still implemented the policy, but did it lawfully. And then the captain later on had to recognize, hey, Cap, you messed this up. This is how it should be written, and have to revise that policy.
Yeah, because I think that's where I got confused, because policy isn't necessarily always law, and
Right.
it's even more not always necessarily constitutional law. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, these are separate things. So now you're a sergeant. You have, I think you said, from 10 to 15 men under you. Now, are these police officers someone that you worked with all these years? Like, do you get to pick your own team? Like, how does that work?
No, no. As a sergeant, you don't get to pick your team at all. They're certainly not in patrol. Like if you're in a specialized unit, maybe, but not in patrol. You're assigned where there's a vacancy. You got promoted because somebody else left, right? So there's a hole somewhere. Now that person who left might be a captain, and everybody moved up, but somewhere there's a space for a sergeant, and you get put into that space. And the people you work with now, you may have been working with before, or they might be. At that time, we worked 4 days on, 4 days off. So half of the department worked 4 days, and the other half of the department worked 4 days. And unless you worked overtime, um, you rarely worked with that other squad. So you
Mhm.
might end up going to a squad that you haven't worked with in years or even ever.
So you're not really. uh, fully confident of your whole team, basically, right? If you don't know these officers for an extensive period of time, how do you deal with that? Because again, this is not a regular job. This is not, being a manager at a Walmart. These, you as a police officers, you're making some crucial decisions throughout the day that impact real people. So that's interesting. Like, so you had no say in what kind of team you have, basically.
Correct.
Did you ever have an incident where the men that were under you, you seen they were out of line and you had to take some sort of action? Like, how do you? What I'm trying to ask is, how do you approach that? Do you go about that the legal way, or do you go about that internal, your own, like, squad way to dealing with it?
Yeah, it depends on the level of um, a problem. Yeah, level of problem. So, somebody shows up late a few times, I'm not going to mark them up and recommend a suspension. But if they're disrespectful to me and our coworkers, then, and I don't just mean joking. I mean, like flat out disrespectful. Then, maybe I'm recommending some more official action. So it all depends on the problem that occurs, the consistency of the problem. If somebody shows up late to roll call a few times and I say, "Hey, man, what's going on? Is everything okay?" "Oh, yeah, my car's broken, but I got it all fixed and I won't be late again." And they're not late again, then it's over. But if I'm like, "Hey, man, what's going on? Is everything okay?" And there's a bunch of excuses, and the next week and the week after that and the week after that, they're still late. Well, I'm doing two things. One, I'm digging more into their personal life to see if it's something other than they just don't care about their time, right? Maybe they're having trouble at home. Maybe they're having financial problems. Maybe they're an alcoholic, right? And I want to get them some professional help outside of just disciplinary action. Or maybe they're just a jerk and they need to get marked up and, get a couple of days suspension. So it's all a building process.
So, being that sergeant, it's very important to be in tune with your officers, like, even on a personal level. You just said something very important, that you might question, like, is this person having addiction problems or things like that. So it is very important for the sergeant to get personal with his team.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, as part of a leader, just being a leader, um, you can't just keep things at a work level, because people bring work home and bring home to work. So
Mm.
you have to, on some level, become personal. Do you get invasive in their personal life? No, that would be going too far. But if you recognize something that's happening at work that you think might be because of a personal issue, then yeah, you got to dig a little bit.
In your personal experience, your team, how much respect did they have for you?
I feel like most of the people who worked for me over the years uh, respected me a lot. That's not to say everybody. I can think of a few people who flat out hated me. One of them flat out told me, "I don't like you. I've tried to like you and I don't." I think that's kind of funny. But I think if somebody is liked by everybody, they're doing something wrong, right? Like if somebody's hated by everybody, they're doing something wrong. But if they're liked by everybody, they're doing something wrong too, because we're all human. We all have different personalities, right? So my personality isn't going to mesh with everyone. So somebody's got to not like me.
Yeah, well, what I was getting into, um, as a sergeant, how important is it to have that respect, even on a personal level, from your officers?
It's extremely important because, like I said before, the sergeant, in my opinion, is the most important position in a police department. So if that sergeant doesn't have respect, then the people who work under him or her aren't going to necessarily do the things that they're supposed to do. They're not going to, you know, if you don't respect your boss, then you're just going to do whatever you want. And there has to be rules. There has to be hierarchy in a police department. It can't be just everybody do their own thing and it's all going to work out. There has to be hierarchy in a police department.
But again, you're with all due respect, you're kind of using these similes, your boss and this and that. I think that being a police officer is much more important than someone, let's say, running a factory. It's just my humble opinion,
Mhm.
because again, you're affecting people's lives, man. This is, it's crucial. Um, Now you're a sergeant. Is that when you started? You're still out on the streets, basically. Is
Yeah.
that when you started working the night shifts?
Yeah, I worked. So in the 5 years as a patrol officer, I worked night shift. Excuse me, 1 year out of those five, and then the rest were like a mid shift, 11:30 in the morning to 9:30 at night. But once I became a sergeant, I worked for probably 10 years straight from 5 p.m. to 3 a.m.
As far as crime is concerned, how different does the night look to opposed to the day?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting because, like I was saying earlier in the discussion, day shift it starts off kind of slow, then you get some burglar alarms, and then it slows down a little bit, and then you deal with the schools. Um, as as you start working night shift, the schools are closed, right? You're not dealing with them anymore. Um, the amount of drug dealing, the amount of violent crime tends to be higher at night. So you're dealing with more criminals and less of the quote unquote normal population. The people who are just going to work and going home, right? I'm dealing with a lot of them during the day because they're out of their house, they're going to work, they're picking up their kids from school. So I have more of a opportunity to encounter them at night. A lot of them are home, or they'll run out to the supermarket, but they're not hanging out on street corners, they're not driving around 2 o'clock in the morning. So, not to say all those people that you encounter at night are criminals, but there are more of them that you're encountering and dealing with than the average population of somebody going to pick up their kids from school.
It's actually human nature. It's psychology. People tend to subconsciously think that at night they can be hidden better, and this is why a lot more crime happens at night.
Yep.
Can you remember like a something that sticks out, maybe something that had an impact on you when you were a sergeant, where you guys were really put to the test, and maybe your bond was put to the test, maybe like a high crime that happened? Like, can you remember something like that?
Yeah, I can absolutely. There were a group of us. We were working in patrol, but our captain took took two sergeants, me and another sergeant, and a group of patrol officers to go out and do some what we call proactive work. Right, so we're not responding to calls on the radio. We're looking for people with guns and drugs in a particular area of the city. Um, I was driving by myself on one particular street, and the other sergeant was driving by himself on a parallel street, and there were one or two police cars behind him. And as he passed a parked car, he spotted something, like I was saying earlier, that just didn't look right. So he pulled his car over and got out to investigate a little further. And as he walked in front of that parked car, the driver put it in drive and ran the sergeant over, like literally
Damn.
over. The sergeant got off a couple of gunshots at the driver, but they didn't hit him. So I heard the gunshots before I knew what was going on. Then I heard one of the cops behind that sergeant say that he had just been run over by a car. And now I'm one street over and I see this car come flying past me. So I know immediately this is the car who just hit that sergeant. Um, I get into a vehicle pursuit. There's another cop with me. Not in the car with me, but directly behind me. The pursuit didn't last long, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. It was not long, where the person crashed the car that he was in. We get out in a short foot chase and arrest that guy. Uh, I end up immediately going back to the scene where the sergeant had been hit, and his leg was broken in half. I mean, if this is his leg, this part is just hanging. It's broken.
Damn.
That was a difficult night. Um, Obviously for that sergeant, he had years of recovery after that. And for everybody in that squad, and particularly the people who were working in that unit that night, that was a very difficult night to deal with. Nobody died, which is amazing. That the person who did it went to prison for a long time. The sergeant survived and ended up retiring early, but has a lifetime of injuries to deal with.
How do you deal with something like that as a sergeant and your men? Do you guys kind of gather after an incident like that and you have some sort of a talk with your men? Like, how do you deal with something like that?
Yeah.